Let's go to Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, up bright and early on a Saturday. Good morning, Simon.
Morning, Matt.
It's been another busy week. Every week is a busy week for you. Let's talk about Marco Rubio, first of all. As I discussed with Lindsay Hilsum at the top of the show, nicer words for his European ears, but essentially still talking about civilizational challenges and essentially still not quite trusting the European Union or those lily-livered liberals in Europe.
Absolutely. And I see that after the speech was over, the organiser of the Munich Security Conference said that some in the room had breathed a collective sigh of relief. If that's the case, then those people engaged in the sighing, I think, are largely deluding themselves still, because when Marco Rubio says things like, we want Europe to be strong, we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own, and he talks about the two continents being connected spiritually and culturally, you know, he's talking about what he defined as the restoration and revival of Europe that he and President Trump and J.D. Vance, who made a much more bruising speech at this event a year ago, argue is rooted in political change taking place among the government leaders who are attending this very conference. They don't want Keir Starmer at this conference representing the UK. They want Nigel Farage at this conference representing the UK. They want Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella representing France. You know, it's absolutely clear that
or the
in
AFD
the
in
national
Germany.
security strategy. Yeah, correct. Official US government strategy now is to engineer political change in Europe that sees what the Trump administration and Mr. Rubio refer to as patriotic European parties coming to the fore to engage in that revival and restoration of the continent. So anybody in that room who didn't come from one of those patriotic political parties that was breathing a sigh of relief over the speech, I think was definitely deluding themselves.
Just briefly on that front, I mean, the Europeans have discovered, sort of, that they have a thing in the back of their backs called a spine. They're standing up to the United States. They don't like being humiliated, understandably. Does this delight Washington, or does it kind of bemuse Washington, or does it even worry Washington that the Europeans are clubbing together a bit more?
Well, if you look at what Washington says, and you can read this, by the way, on the LBC website in the dispatch that was written just within the last few days for LBC by the US ambassador to the UK, Warren Stevens, he would argue that they welcome the development of more spine on the part of European governments because, as Marco Rubio himself, the Secretary of State, said today, we basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, he said, we don't want to be the world's policeman. We don't want to have to be taking the responsibility for doing all of this work, and by that he meant largely in Europe. I mean, but that is all tied in their minds, whether they express it publicly or not, with the idea that if you want to head off civilizational erasure in Europe, the only way to do that is to change course politically. So there should be no comfort among existing governments of Europe about where the United States currently stands in terms of the scale of its ambition for change in the continent.
Let's talk about Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, in an absolute, dogfight, mudslinging on Capitol Hill this week over the Epstein files. Give us the latest on that.
Well, there are still calls for Pam Bondi to be fired or to resign, and they are coming not only from Democrats, they are coming from some prominent influencers within Donald Trump's MAGA community. And that, of course, is because Pam Bondi not only sullied her own position, one of the great offices of state here, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, the Attorney General, this particular Attorney General has allowed the Department of Justice to become the American President's personal office of retribution. All talk about independence of the Department of Justice has been incinerated here. But also because, of course, members of the MAGA community want total transparency in many cases over the Epstein files. And she stands accused of an ongoing cover-up, indeed, of releasing 3 million documents just a couple of weeks ago that failed in thousands of instances to offer the protection that her department had promised to Epstein's victims and survivors. But simultaneously, she's accused of withholding 3 million documents that may have very pertinent information about Epstein and his fellow protagonists in the wealthy and powerful community in which he was operating. So MAGA wants all of those documents to be released. And when she engaged in total disdain and refused even to turn to the Epstein survivors and apologise, saying she wasn't going to be pulled down into the gutter,
extraordinary
that did her no good at all.
Yeah.
Astonishing. Astonishing.
I mean, in this country, on this side of the pond, we're seeing that an association with Epstein can get you shamed and humiliated, and you lose your job or your title in the case of the man formerly known as Prince Andrew. We're beginning to see some repercussions in America as well, aren't we? Although not where you might expect. So Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, is safe as houses as far as we know, but other people are losing their jobs.
Yes, absolutely. We saw Kathy Rumler lose her job at a top law firm. She's a former White House counsel. She was in the Obama administration. There were very problematic exchanges with Jeffrey Epstein for her that led her to lose her position this week. We've seen other figures in the world of business also resigning from their posts. I mean, I think we are, though, still at this point here where, because Donald Trump is able to claim absolution based on the documents that have currently been released, that is merely fueling the notion that the stuff that is being withheld may compromise not only the President of the United States, but other figures in the political firmament. And don't forget, we're still waiting to see if the Clintons are going to be deposed by the House Oversight Committee later this month. And if they are they going to follow the Ghislaine Maxwell example and plead the fifth, as she did earlier in the week? Or are they going to offer any testimony that might potentially lead the committee down additional avenues in terms of the probe that it's engaged in?
Finally, and I'm afraid very briefly, Simon, Trump doesn't like to, have us not pay attention to him for at least a week. His actions matter, his words matter. Where is the next fireworks coming from? Is it Iran?
Well, I think you've got to keep an eye on Iran, although he certainly hasn't sounded in the last 24 hours like a man who necessarily wants a fight. He has moved a second aircraft carrier into the region, so that's pertinent. But I think for Donald Trump, he's got issues at home that he's got to address. This has been a week of reverses for him here. The Minneapolis climb down, questions about what does his immigration mass deportation policy look like going forward? Are they really pulling all these people off the streets of Minneapolis? And he's gearing up for midterm election campaign rallies all over the country. But yeah, he definitely needs some kind of distraction to change the subject here, because it's not been a good week for him.